You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew. All right, we're here with Ellen Curtis. Ellen is currently the Secretary of the Writers Alliance of Newfoundland and Labrador. She is a partner with Engine Books. She is the co-author of the Infinity series with Engine Books, as well as the editor of the From the Rock series from Engine Books, along with Aaron Vance. Do I have all that correct?
Yes, you do, Matthew.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so while we've got Ellen on the hot seat today, I thought I would ask some of the most asked questions from the internet with regard to authors and see what this accomplished young author has to say about them. What, if any, literary pilgrimages have you been on?
I've actually been on a few. A couple of years ago, I went to London, England in general. And so while I was in England, I went to the Globe Theatre to visit the heart of Shakespeare, because that was one of my really, really big inspirations growing up. And I also visited 221 Baker Street.
Did you?
Yes.
That's cool.
It left a lot to be desired.
Well, I mean,
it's basically a glorified gift shop.
But to be fair, Baker Street existed before that did. It's like if they made... Imagine if my apartment number and street name was featured in a book that became famous, and all of a sudden there were just tourists hanging around outside my home.
But I mean, at least you'd have a cute little house then. This was kind of... I mean, there were better things you could do. When I went back to England a few years later... my whole reason for going was because we had won tickets to the Cursed Child Harry Potter play. Okay. Well, reduced rate tickets. And so our whole reason for going there, my sister and I went, was to go to the play and go to Universal Studios. And it was like our big Harry Potter visit.
I see.
Yes.
Cool. Would you call that a literary pilgrimage because it was Harry Potter?
Yes.
I see.
I would.
Okay. Excellent.
Yes.
To your recollection, what is the first book that made you cry?
Oh, geez. I mean, I'm a crier, so who knows, really. I can't think of one in particular. I mean, I know I cried during Harry Potter.
Okay, what's any book that made you cry then?
Oh gosh, who doesn't cry when Sirius dies?
Wait, Sirius dies?
Are you a monster? Yeah, you might be a monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically anytime you might think, that's a cryable scene, I will cry at that scene.
It always is weird, though. I mean, there's always the cynic in me that's like, yes, it was very sad when the author stopped writing the character. They didn't die because they weren't alive.
I mean, that is very cynical, and I think that belittles what an author does.
Yes. Yes, it does.
They create life.
No, we don't.
Totally do. I think you're totally wrong there.
Yeah. Does the act of writing energize you, or does it exhaust you?
Different at different times, and with different projects. Some projects are really energizing for me, and I'll just keep going till it's all done. And then other projects, it's like pulling teeth.
Can you give an example from your library of your written work that came out fast and was like pulling teeth?
I generally find short stories come out really fast, probably because I can sit down and just stay there until it's done. Anything that has a bit of a longer plot, well, the things I've worked on with the longer plot have been joint projects.
So you would say that, short stories like Falling into Fire and the Tourniquet Revival and stuff like that was more energizing, whereas, say, the Infinity series was more exhausting of a process.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot more back and forth with that, and hair pulling.
Interesting. Are you going back to short fiction anytime soon?
Oh, yeah. Usually got a bit of short fiction on my plate, so...
Do you think you'll have anything in Dystopia from the Rock?
Likely not, just because I've kind of set myself a limit that if it's a From the Rock anthology that's not my wheelhouse genre kind of thing, or Aaron's wheelhouse genre, or say even yours, that the first priority is new talent.
That's fair. To your mind, what are common traps for aspiring authors?
I think a lot of people, maybe who are growing up doing like language arts classes or who are known as the writers in their family. A lot of times when you're young, you get told that you're a good writer and you fall into the trap of thinking that because you're a good writer, it doesn't need to be work. And it is work. You have to work to make your craft excellent. So I think sometimes aspiring writers start realizing how much work it can be to put out a finished product and are scared off by the fact that it's suddenly hard for them.
Yeah, that's true. And on the same sort of topic, when it comes to like high school language arts classes and stuff like that, I find that it can be very daunting for a young author to be, say, at the top of their class in English, like the only one in their class who's really interested in English and the only one who's interested in writing novels. But then they go to university or college or just out into the world.
Even to another writing class.
Another writing class. And suddenly they're not special. Suddenly the only people in the room are people that like writing and want to write novels, kind of thing. And it's like, if you come to identify yourself based on that thing.
I think it can be hard for a lot of people to have that realization. And I think it is the make or break point for a lot of writers, or just even a lot of storytellers, where they decide, okay, this is my passion and this is what I'm going to follow, or this is just going to be my hobby. And I think more often than not, it's probably for the best that people make that decision at that point, because...
Whichever way.
Yeah, whichever way, because writing is a great hobby, but it's a really hard profession.
Yeah. On that note, do you think that having a big ego helps authors or hurts them?
Honestly, I'm just adverse to big egos in general. I think you can definitely suffer from having too much of a self-deprecating attitude, but I can think of a few authors I've encountered over the years who have had big egos, and I have not willingly been in a room with them since.
Yeah, that's happened.
Or read their work, for that matter. I will not willingly pick up their work.
That's true. That is a thing. And it's hard because when you're an indie author, I mean, when you don't have the marketing talent of a large firm behind you, basically your personality is what makes people decide to read your book or not. Your personality in the cover, basically.
Oh yeah, and it's this tricky tightrope you have to walk, because you can't undersell yourself, but you also can't oversell yourself.
It's a really thin line.
And if you've got confidence, let's say, that's one thing, but arrogance is another, and people will see through that very, very quickly. They might pick up the first book, but they will not come back for the second.
Personally, what is your writing kryptonite?
I think my writing kryptonite is probably good weather. No, I can't say that even, because...
I feel like it's Stardew Valley.
Oh, that's one of them. I feel like my writing kryptonite is my laziness. It's like, when you're a writer, a lot of times you've got a lot of different plates that you're juggling, and so many times I'll come home, and at the end of the day, I will be too mentally exhausted to put together a story, but maybe not physically exhausted enough that I don't want to be occupying my time doing something else. So I think the mental exhaustion is probably my kryptonite.
Okay. Have you ever gotten reader's block?
Oh, heck yes. You try managing the submissions folder for Engine for, a couple years.
I am, actually.
You just started because I got reader's block.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. We've been really blessed. I mean, we got a lot of really, really excellent stuff come through, but you also get a lot of unpolished work come through. So when, say, you've got 6 unpolished pieces in a row, you're there banging your head against the keyboard wondering, like, is it something that's wrong with me? Like, am I giving this a fair enough shake? And there have been instances where that's been the case, and, I've asked someone else, oh, can you take a look at this as well? It's just the feeling that I'm getting.
Have you ever considered writing under a pseudonym? Or, as I used to call it, a pseudonym?
Yes, I have considered it. Not for anything I'm working on now, but I have a couple projects floating around in mind that perhaps I'd like to have a little bit of different branding on.
Okay.
So for purposes of branding, yes, I've considered writing under a pseudonym.
Cool. Interesting. I'd say that I can't wait to see what those are, but maybe I won't know what they are, because maybe they'll be under a pseudonym.
Perhaps not. I mean, I've had some strategic ideas about pseudonyms, but it's one of those things that you want to keep close to the chest.
Yeah, because the second you say it out loud.
Exactly. Then people know, and then what's the point? So, yeah.
Do you try to be more original in your work, or do you try to deliver on readers' expectations? Like, do you write to genre formulas, or do you go off-genre? Personally, I go off-genre a lot, and it affects my rankings on Amazon negatively sometimes, but there are different thoughts about it. What are yours?
I struggle with that one too, because when you're not writing the status quo, it does affect your numbers.
It does.
Because, I mean, people have a set expectation when they're going into genre that it's going to follow a certain pattern and a certain rhythm. I do like experimenting with ideas that go off the beaten path, but it's when you're trying to make this your bread and butter and you're trying to, put food on the table, you can become really caught up in trying to deliver what is going to rise the ranks fastest. I try to stay away from that, and in a lot of ways that's why I've turned more of my energy toward fostering different talent rather than writing myself.
Yeah, I find it's even more than it even was 10 years ago. It's become a symptom of the way Amazon and the way online's taken over, because there isn't a way to easily tag things as fitting in multiple genres. Like, it either fits somewhere. Like, I write a supernatural detective series, and it fits. I find no matter what way I market it, someone's unhappy. Either I market it as supernatural, and people are mad at the half of the book that's more detective focused. And if I market it as detective, people are upset about the half that's supernatural focused.
And that's a real creativity killer too, because you're getting so caught up in trying to fix what I guess certain demographics see as a problem, when if you're stepping back and looking at it just from a story perspective, it can make for a really, really fun story.
And I mean, some of the best fiction, some of the most seminal fiction of our time was at the time cross-genre. It's just now it's become the bedrock of a new genre, like dystopian thrillers. That's now just a thing. Dystopian YA. Lord of the Rings, technically at the time, was just a big genre mishmash of all of the different fantasy stuff.
For sure. It's frustrating, but if you really believe in what you're doing, it's important to ignore the stats and just focus on producing good fiction.
Yeah, I agree. Good fiction is the best marketing tool. Do you think someone can be a writer if they don't feel emotions strongly? Or do you think that writers need to, be the type of person that wears their heart on their sleeve kind of thing?
I think that they can be a good writer for a different type of writing than an emotional writer is a good type of writer for.
Yeah.
I think
hard science fiction.
Hard science fiction, is what immediately comes to mind there. Is good when you're not adding a whole bunch of emotion in. Whereas, say, writing a romance probably wouldn't go over well if you were not putting in emotion.
If you don't have, say, it might be a better way to ask would be if you have emotional intelligence or not.
Yeah, I think an author needs to probably be emotionally intelligent to hit the mark with a lot of readers.
Yeah.
But, that said, there are readers who aren't necessarily going to be emotionally intelligent as well. And there are, for them, authors that aren't very emotional probably wouldn't miss the mark.
That's true, and it's hard to fit. That's almost a marketing trick in and of itself, because I've read books where, say, hard science fiction, to go back to it, where if you gave that to a reader that likes emotional-driven things, they just can't get into it.
Exactly.
It's like reading a repair manual.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I've given stuff that has strong emotional beats to it, and you give it to people who more are factual-based, and all they're doing is picking out the plot holes or the logic holes or stuff like this.
Yeah.
When a lot of writers who write more emotional stuff, emotional-driven stuff, will say that it doesn't matter if everything makes perfect sense. It matters if it makes emotional sense.
Yeah. Thinking about that too, a lot of more heavy, action-driven things coming out. You see a lot of the times in movies where the script may not make much sense from a character arc perspective, but it's got all the flash and bang that draws in moviegoers.
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing translates to books as well sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Comic books and superhero movies and stuff are a lot like that too.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, there's Like a lot of time, and you could be critical of this too, but a lot of times there's like violence. Usually it'll be end with a fight scene or something like that, and it's this moment where logically that doesn't make sense sometimes, but it's gotten to the point where there needs to be a fight because that's what emotionally makes sense.
Yeah.
I was watching something the other day, and they compared the modern blockbuster superhero movie to musicals, and they were saying that in a musical, when the emotions get to a point that they're at a breaking point, you have a song. And in a superhero movie, when the emotions get to the point where you're having a breaking point, you have a fight. It's the same thing. It's like formulaically, it's the same. You just replace musicals with fight scenes.
I mean, I'd like to see someone's thesis argument for that. Sure.
For sure. I would also now want to see, I want to see Avengers 5, the musical. Because Disney has the property, they could do that. And just every fight scene was also a musical.
I'm gonna veto that one.
If I had a hammer, I'd hammer night and day.
I mean, I'm thinking back to Once More with Feeling.
Yeah.
And
Spider-Man Stomp Out the Night was a big thing.
I'm not familiar with that. But
that was a Broadway musical starring Spider-Man. It was bad.
Again, I'll pass, although I did just see an aerial silks artist perform to Spider-Man, and it was so on point.
Yes, you were down at an event down St. John's doing book selling.
Yes.
Yes. So do you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a larger body of work with a mythology, like a series? Preferably.
I prefer having a mythology and a flow, because I don't think stories should necessarily be summed up in a perfect bow. I really hate that when that happens, because I think as humans we're always encountering situations where we have to make our peace with something being unresolved, and I think playing into this formulaic oh, and they have a happy ending, or oh, everyone dies at the end. Yeah. I find it's kind of set us up as a society for not being prepared to deal with a lack of closure.
Maybe, yeah. Especially when it comes to television, because television back in the day, before, say, 1995, especially sitcoms, everything has to be wrapped up and returned to status quo. Mm-hmm. There was a whole series of arguments based on the rise of sitcoms, like the Disney Afternoon style sitcom, or TGIF I should say, and how they were giving the kids that were growing up on them an unrealistic expectation of when that things would all be back to normal by the end of 30 minutes.
Yeah.
If you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be?
I mean, I'm still young, so telling my younger writing self something is not going back too far, really. I mean, I feel like I'm at that point where I'm almost too old to say I'm young. Okay. But I'm still in
Have you ever made a reference to someone who's pre-17 and they don't get the reference?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
it's always
painful.
The worst. It is painful.
Song lyrics, or referencing a character, or even
yeah, I was
and just not getting what kids are into. There's a lot of it where I'm
fingerlings.
Oh yeah, I can see that. See, I like fingerlings, but
okay. I've referenced mbop to someone the other day.
I know, yeah.
And they didn't know what it was, and I was like, "How can you know what that was?" She was like, "I was born in 2000, and I died a little inside."
Yeah.
For those of you listening on Mun Radio who don't know, mbop was the greatest song of all time.
I beg to differ.
What would you think it is? Don't say that trash that you know I hate.
We'll just agree to disagree. How's that?
Yeah. As a writer, what would you choose as your mascot or spirit animal or patronus?
What would I choose as my mascot?
Yeah.
Okay, so this goes back a ways. But I had a very similar question thrown at me for my final English exam in high school. And at the time, I chose a snake.
That makes sense.
As you know, I have a snake. And many people they don't get it. They really don't get it. But basically, I'm okay, I like to eat. And once I'm done eating, I like to curl up in a little ball, someplace nice and warm, and maybe bury myself a little bit, but then just sit there and chill. And that sounds really good.
I see.
But also...
This is as a writer.
Yeah,
Okay.
but like I like to do my writing when I'm warm and cozy.
I see.
And that's something I'm actually really struggling with because I've just switched from having a laptop and being able to do that and doing all my writing like from the couch or in bed to having a really uncomfortable chair for my desktop set up and not being able to blanket up or curl up and I need a new chair ASAP.
How many unpublished or half-finished books do you have in your internal library?
Without actually looking to count, there are probably 4 or 5 that I've started over the years. They're just sitting there. Unfinished short stories, I wouldn't have any of those because I usually like get those out all in one sitting.
Cool. That's a talent. What kind of research do you do, and how long do you usually spend researching a book?
It depends, but I am known for doing buckets of research.
Too much.
But that really helps me. So I'm like into Google Street View. I'm into like Yelp reviews for restaurants for what my characters might be eating, and yeah, I go whole hog. And like if my character is supposed to be, you know, an expert in something, I try and read as much as I can about it. If I have someone in my circle who has that frame of reference and that knowledge base, I try and make sure to bounce ideas off of them and make sure it's coming off authentic, because I really like making sure that my story reads as authentic. And I think research is the way to do that.
Cool. Have you ever read anything that makes you think differently about the process of writing fiction?
Yes. A Prayer for Owen Meany
Really?
completely changed the way I thought about setting up stories, because there were so many layers to that story that at first glance seem like you're just telling the story of 2 friends growing up, and it's a story that spans
30 years?
I think it's 20.
Okay.
But it's a story that spans decades, and so there's a lot of information there, and you don't think that everything could possibly tie in, but the magic in it is that it does, and that everything has meaning, and the way that things have meaning kind of points to something else. And I loved it.
Actually, it's an interesting... I find that, like... I wonder if Signs, the M. Night Shyamalan movie, was in a way inspired by A Prayer for Owen Meany. Because it's the same payoff. It's the same... It was all leading to one thing.
Is it, though?
It is! And I think Signs did it better. I argue that Prayer for Owen Meany is sometimes pretentious.
No.
I do.
No. I think you're thinking of the movie adaptation.
I am a bit.
Horrible.
Yeah, the movie. What was the movie called again?
I can't even remember. I tried to block it out of my mind.
But it wasn't Prayer for Owen Meany, was it?
No, and it barely stuck to the good parts of the book.
It was only like the first third of the book? Because they stayed kids the whole time, weren't they?
I was so frustrated. Like, the book... You gotta read the book.
I do mix them up, because I've read the book. We were in a book club. It was your suggestion. Yeah. I've read the book. And then when we were discussing the book, we got together and we watched the movie. So I watched the movie directly, like, the day after I finished the book. So they are really linked in my head, like, because they were both there at the same time. I'm having trouble distinguishing between them right now.
Oh, that's sad for you.
It is. And the armadillo with no arms was on the cover. It was a huge... Yeah. It wasn't in the movie at all, was it?
I can't even remember.
I don't think it was in there at all.
That was... the motifs.
Oh, so many motifs.
Oh, it was so good.
Was it?
It was. You don't argue with that. You know it was good.
Yeah.
It was good.
Nah. In your mind, Ellen, what are the ethics of writing about historical figures?
So, this is frustrating for me, because I feel like this is another kind of tightrope walking scenario.
For you talking about it, or for the authors that do it?
For the authors that do it. So, I think if enough time has passed, and this kind of goes back to like the questions that a lot of historians ask of themselves, is like, when does it become, or archaeologists, let's say, when does it become archaeology instead of grave robbing? And I think that is the same kind of scenario. Yeah. I think that's the same kind of scenario for writing historical figures. I grew up loving historical fiction, but more and more I find myself really uncomfortable with some historical fiction in particular.
I know you have a problem with some historical fiction that involves original people or First Nations people or things like that.
Oh yeah, like very, very frustrated. Like, my family has Beothic heritage, and even though that's a part of my history, it's something that I don't feel comfortable writing about because we don't know the culture, because it has been destroyed. And I'm always left feeling very uncomfortable when I do hear people writing from that perspective.
Yeah.
And I mean, no disrespect to the people who choose to do that, but I think there is often a level of appropriation that it leaves me feeling very gross.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also, I mean, there's a long storied history, and it is, again, that's a good analogy, actually, like the archaeology. At what point is archaeology and not grave robbing?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like, Disney, I know you like this movie, but there's a lot of controversy around it. Disney had no problem doing it with Pocahontas, but there were a lot of liberties taken.
Oh, well, so
shocking
here's my
amount.
thing there. So here's my thing. Growing up, Pocahontas and Tiger Lily were two of the only characters I saw who I would see when I looked in the mirror, because growing up, I was much darker than my friends, and I had very dark hair and dark eyes, and I got called out a lot for being very different because my sister was so blonde and pale and blue-eyed, and people were like, are you adopted even? So that representation was very important for me, and as an adult now looking back, that's very frustrating because that wasn't good representation, but that was all we had.
Yeah. Pocahontas' representation goes, the character from Disney, she as a character, if you divorce her from the fact that she's a historical figure, it's not the worst.
I think there are still a lot of problems with that narrative.
No. You know what? The narrative, fine. The character herself. There's still some issues now that I'm thinking about it. As I'm thinking more and more.
I think we can pick it apart and
that could be a whole episode.
Oh, for sure. But I think that speaks to the importance of representation in fiction, and that's why I get really frustrated when people are like, "Oh, are you like talking about authors?" And it's like, "Oh, why are they going out of their way to include someone who checks X, Y, and Z box?" And it's like, well, because there are
X, Y, and Z people out there.
People are out there and they're looking for representation, and representation is important.
Yeah.
But say it all day. Representation is important.
Yeah, that's fair. Here's a lighthearted one. How do you select the names of your characters?
Baby names, websites, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Does it affect your Google search history? Like, does Google think that you're baby crazy?
I mean, probably. Google probably thinks I'm baby crazy anyway.
Yeah. Do you read reviews of your books? And if so, how do you handle good or bad ones?
I do read reviews of my books, but kind of need to divorce yourself from them to live a productive life. Because the good ones, if you're going to buy into the good ones, will put you on cloud 9.
Yeah.
But if you're opening yourself up to that, and you're putting your stock into that, then you're also putting your stock into the ones that are negative, and they'll bring you right back down. So I kind of just... I like to see when people are reading and engaging with the text, but I try not to take it to heart.
Do you hide any secrets in your books that only a few people will ever find?
Yeah, for sure. Especially with anything that's set in the Engine universe. There's a lot more mythology there than is directly referenced.
Have you ever Googled yourself?
For a little while, I had a
Google Alert
set up, yeah. And I think I still get the emails. I just haven't turned it off, and I just always delete them. But, I mean, it's never usually things about me. Even when I've got stuff on, and, like, I've got articles being written, or I've made an appearance somewhere, it'll still be, like, people with, like, part of my name that show up.
You've got a name that you share your name with a few, like, even if you include your middle name, you share your name with a few historical figures. Like, not big historical figures, but a few. But, like, people who have had articles or something written, like, minor stuff, but...
More often, it's, like, someone with part of my name will come up. Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.